So you were talking about some of the actors who came in for Roger Rabbit.
Well, Roger Rabbit was a breakthrough type of film because of the blend of live action animation, and Zemeckis was the perfect director for it. You know, given his skill level and just love of both mediums. But it was, you know, and because of that, it required actors come in to meet, you know, noted actors. They didn't have to audition, but just to understand how it was going to be done. So I recall scheduling meetings with Robert Duvall and Gene Hackman and Jim Garner, and coming in so Robert Zemeckis could explain to them how you intend to do this, or at least. And later on, what I discovered, I received a call from the head of business affairs at Warner Brothers, just letting me know that in Bugs Bunny's contract, he never has and never will take second billing to anybody. So I had to ultimately have a conversation with some of these actors' agents to say, by the way, if they get the offer, they'll have to be second billing to Bugs Bunny. And some of the responses I could tell you, what are you talking about? I said, well, like Gene Hackman's agent, he said, second billing to Bugs Bunny. I said, well, that's. So ultimately, we ended up testing two actors, James Woods and Bob Hoskins, and you know, using some of the almost alternate stand-in animation pieces and green screens, and both actors were terrific, but Hoskins was just physically better for the role, and ultimately did a great job, you know. And then once again, we had the chance to bring in fresh talent for the other roles. The actors, the voice of Roger Rabbit himself, Charles Fleischer. And I'd seen Charlie Fleischer at the Comedy Store. And he has one of the funniest stand-ups, which is one he does, was Bugs Bunny, not Bugs Bunny, but Donald Duck having his first sexual experience. And on stage, it was always hilarious. So when I brought him in to do the audition, he just was, you know, he's just such a animated actor. He's already animated, so it didn't take much, but and he was able to do a lot of voices, and he would really just embody the character of Roger Rabbit. And the way I would audition the actors, I would literally, normally it was just the reverse. When I audition actors, I'm looking at them, I'm watching them, I'm exchanging dialogue. These auditions took place in a recording studio where I would literally close my eyes and, you know, maybe read dialogue, but literally just listen. And Richard Williams would be there drawing, sketching faces to certain voices, to nuances of the actors. So it was a wonderful process. In fact, in hindsight, Richard Williams was sketching some of the characters, and I would take those sketches home. And one morning I came down to breakfast at home, and my kids was using them as placemats. I mean, it's like early drawings of Picasso that they didn't know. They was used as placemats underneath, you know, or they marked them. They thought they could improve on his animation, you know. So.
That's great. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about casting Touched by an Angel.
Oh yes, Touched by an Angel was, you know, it was in line with my spiritual beliefs. So and I knew Della Reese from years and of working in the industry and admired her. And the script, you know, I didn't do the pilot. We were called in to do the series. So and when I heard about the pilot, I thought it was a good idea. Then when we were called in to do the series, and the writer-producer Martha Williamson, I believe her name is, you know, interviewed us, and I say us because it was myself, Carol Dudley, and a gentleman named David Giella at the time was part of my staff. And we took the show on with, you know, and just, but it was being done in Utah. It wasn't to be filmed here. So the question was, could we cast the show on a remote location from LA? And we did. I mean, successfully about 5 years. We did the casting for that show, and it was just a wonderful experience. And there was one episode particularly that my favorite is because Della Reese, one of her good friends, a good sister friend, was Maya Angelou. And Maya was a wonderful actress and did an episode, but she wrote a poem. I mean, she's such a genius. She wrote a poem, a love poem, a wedding poem, for the episode that was about love, and that was really special.
Did you go to set sometimes then and watch the production?
Not I actually, believe it or not, all the time. And I took up skiing later on, and when I stopped to think now how many opportunities I could have gone up there on the ski. No, I was really just too busy. I was just too busy with other projects.
So talk about casting the Bernie Mac show.
Well, there's so many things when you see your past catching up with your life. Well, Bernie's from Chicago, and I'm from Chicago. Bernie Mac was like a absolute favorite comedian in Chicago. There were a lot of talented comedians. In fact, my cousin, James Spinks, was the host at a very popular comedy showcase on the South Side, a nightclub called the Cotton Club on around 15th and Michigan. And Bernie Mac was a regular there. He was a regular comedian in Chicago. He was a major star. In fact, he would give concerts, and Michael Jordan would show up. I mean, it was his comedy. And I'd met Bernie over the years. The person who owned the club was his manager. And we would meet, and Bernie was just funny. So when the series came about, it was like just a full circle moment. And Bernie was the only star attached, and the rest was just all newcomers. One of the things that my casting office has been wonderful with was our intern program. The intern program gave aspiring directors and people who wanted to work in the industry to come in and work in the casting office. And one of those interns that came in to work when she was at UCLA was Kim Williams, who is to this day still, does a lot of casting for me. But Kim, took over that show as a casting director. It was for Fox, and Gail Berman was a big fan of mine and of Kim's, and Kim just brought in wonderful actors, and we ended up casting all the other actors in the show, and the show went on to have a wonderful life. And Bernie I hired Bernie for the movie I produced, Get on the Bus. So any chance to work with him was just a joy. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more in depth about the casting process itself. What do you think makes a good casting director?
First, a love of actors. And admiration of the craft and respect for the craft. It is indeed that. And the wonderful thing about it, that since it is a craft, you can find someone who has desires to be an actor, but it doesn't quite know how to reach a level of excellence. So if an actor, someone who's just starting out in 2005, if they're committed because it's a craft and commits to it, by 2014, they could be outstanding. I mean, I've had several actors say to me because I was always very direct with actors about, they asked for my opinion in terms of where they were. I would say, look, this is not the role for you because I can see your inexperience. But that's not to say you don't have talent. It simply says you don't have enough experience. Now, the experience if I were you, I would go back to theater. Always. I'm just, and that's just my opinion. And I've had several actors. In fact, Jeffrey Wright said to me once when I went backstage to see him in a play in New York, he says, I can't thank you enough for the advice you gave me when I came out to Hollywood. Because you could see he was a theater actor, and just, an actor is like an athlete. You have to get in the game. You have to stay in the game. You have to use your skills. And unless you're doing theater somewhere, you don't have to go to New York, but doing somewhere to just refine that talent, you're going to be frustrated. And by being active in theater, it relieves a lot of frustration because you are using your craft. You're not just waiting for the phone call for a TV or a movie. You're more focused on trying to learn the Shakespearean monologue, which is demanding all of you. And as a result of developing that muscle when you do perform, so that's what's great about it. So I'm always impressed with the training that a person receives, especially and even the diversity of the training. They could go on to RADA, from RADA to the groundlings, because that means that the well-roundedness. And I've seen actors come from all walks of life. I mean, the journey to acting, there is no one route. I mean, one of my favorite actors is Rock Dutton, And Rock's story about how he went from jail to Yale is one of the most inspirational stories, but also shows the power of acting. And I'll just share it for a moment with you. And Rock tells it much better than I do, but that Rock grew up in a housing project in Baltimore. He developed the name Rock because he used to throw rocks at people in the head with rocks. And he could look out of his window and see the local prison that he ended up going to when he was very young. And when he went to the local jail, when he walked in, the warden said, "Look, I can smell trouble. I believe you're going to be trouble, so I'm going to put you on 2 weeks probation," which means that if you do anything out of line, I'm going to put you in jail. And jail was referred to as solitary confinement. That's another name for, it was called jail. So Rock is doing, so he's in prison, and he was always in an incorrigible prison. In the first week, he got in a fight with a guard and broke his nose. So he's, but prior to this, when he was in, his first week, a couple of weeks, a girlfriend or a close friend came to see him, and brought him. She told him that she had joined a theater group, and she brought with her a book of Ed Bullen's plays, and she gave it to Rock, and she told him about just how much fun she was having, pursuing his acting career. So Rock went back, to his cell, and he took the book with him, but it sat there with all his other books about, how to overthrow the American government, or Mao's Red Book, whatever, Soul on Ice. So after he got into the fight with the guard, and the ritual for the prison, which is one of humiliation, is to strip. He was stripped naked, and shackled. His feet were shackled, and handcuffed, and he's to be marched through the yard naked into solitary confinement. And you're allowed to take one book with you. And just because he reached for the book of plays by Ed Bullen's, and during his 6 days in solitary confinement with only the light from the door, he used that light to read these plays, and in his mind acted out the various roles. When he came out of his 6 days of solitary confinement, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. But he was still in prison, so he proceeded to just bury himself in plays and theaters. And he tells a story at one point, tells several stories, but one, my favorite, that one day inside the prison commissary, he stood up on the table and was reciting a Shakespearean monologue. And he could feel and hear the room become silent. He understood then the power of acting, the power of words. The room became totally silent as he continued to perform this monologue. The next day, a guy who was on death row came to him or said to him, "Look, if you do that again, I'll kill you. You made me pay attention to you when I didn't want to." That was the validation of his craft and his skill. And Rock is just one of the most amazing actors I've ever known. In fact, when he auditioned for Color Purple, he was so intense that I had to stop the camera and ask him if he was still acting. Because he sent chills. He was that, and I had the pleasure of working with him when I produced Girl on the Bus. He's just one of my favorite actors, and I think one of the greatest actors of all time. Mm-hmm. So the point being is that the road to acting, the road to discovering your gifts is, there's no particular, one route. Mm-hmm. But once you commit to it, and really commit to it, the rewards are immeasurable.
So talk a little about your process. When you're brought onto a project and given a script, what do you start to do? Making notes? Or?
Well, when I was casting, I would read the script. And while reading, actors' names and faces would come to me. And it's still, even now as a producer, that still process works where I'll read a script and I can literally almost in 3D hear or see the actor's face or hear the voice. And that's on page 1. By page 15, it may be a different actor. On page 20, it could be a different. So it may change if and then you may make another note for a secondary role, and you say, well, if that actor who would be great for secondary role will overwhelm the first choice you made for the lead. So you're constantly making notes and adjustments. The degree to which if you can hold on to in your mind a cast, if someone you read the script and only one person can play this part, then that's when you really got something special. But you rarely, if there are very few actors that are so essential that if you lose them, you shouldn't do the movie. And I think Morgan Freeman is that actor. If you have a role in which Morgan is attached, and for some reason he becomes unavailable, you shouldn't do the movie because you can't replace him. And that was true of James Earl Jones, and I think Denzel also. There's a few actors are starting that, I think in some ways, especially true of African American actors. There are those with such unique skill and gifts that in which there may be physical requirements, but what they bring to it is so exceptional that if you cast anyone else, you may be missing something. I think Jack Nicholson. If you're not casting, if Jack Nicholson is attached to a movie and he not available, I'm not sure where you go. Okay, that's a wonderful quality to have. It's not so much based on their star power, just on their skill level. And that's if I were I tell actors, if I were an actor, I would be working toward to being a master of the craft. I would work on the craft with total confidence. As I become better, the industry will awaken to my talents.
So describe when you were casting what a typical casting session would be like.
If it's television, it would be very fast because TV is, at the time, you'd be doing 22 episodes of Rockford Files. So I would read a Rockford Files script and make my notes, check the availability of actors and schedule a casting meeting. Schedule first a casting concept meeting. The concept meeting would be where I would go and meet with the producer, the director, and say, here, I want to make sure that I'm in sync with you on the way you visualize these roles. 90% of the time, we would be, and sometimes the director would have a different idea, and I would have to modify, and then I would go back. During that session, I would also give them a list of possibilities. And as we go through the list of actors, the possibilities, and the lead roles, the small roles, cop number one in those roles, I usually cast those on my own, but the lead role that's going to help move the story along, that has to be in line with what the director and what the producer and what the writer intended. On Rockford File, we had David Chase as a staff writer, and Peter Rosenberg and Steve Cannell. So we had wonderful directors. Michael Schultz would come in and direct, and so we had but usually those sessions, the producer and director had already discussed what the episode should be. First, Jim Garner is a star, and he's the best detective in the world, even though he may have his human flaws, but the character, and how do we support that, and how do you really bring the rest of the show to life? So you want to bring in actors that would complement and work well with Jim or work well with the story. So a list of names. Now, so if I submit 20 names and they approve 5, I then go back to my office and check the availability of those 5. And depending on the role, sometimes we just can cast from just make an offer. Sometimes we require looking at some film. These days, at least when I stopped casting, DVDs, were used when I first started. It required marking the film, it required a VHS, but these days, there's usually enough film available you can just download for someone to get a look. But I still believe, maybe I'm old school, that the auditioning, hearing the words, is the best. It gives as much as you can get a preview of what's going to happen on the set, the less problems you'll have, the fewer problems you'll have. So in TV, going back to process, so read the script, make notes, schedule a casting concept meeting, leave that meeting with approved actors, make offers based on availability, and send them the wardrobe. It was my favorite term when I would get an actor. I would say, okay, send him the wardrobe, which means he's set. And the process takes, I would always make the second offer first. And in TV, there's some guidelines because they have what's called top of the show, which means the most money someone will pay. I don't know what it is today, but when we were doing Rockford, 1-hour series, paid $3,500 for 7 days. That was the most that was called top of the show. But you can sometimes break top if you wanted to hire, which we did several times. Linda Evans, that played the love interest to Jim Garner, we would break top and pay her like $5,000 or something for 7 days. And that extra $5 would come from the budget. And sometimes it would require what's called stunt casting. If they wanted to bring in major name, then the network would give you additional monies. But TV was, it was fast turnaround, and in film the process is similarly, but it's a much more you throw a wider net. You throw a wider net. If sometime when you take on a movie, if you get hired to cast a movie, there has been packaged, where there's a director, there's producers attached, there's stars attached, and you're simply filling in the remaining roles. My favorite is to get a blank canvas. They have a script in which there's no casting, and you can truly assemble a cast. And I think those are always the best. That casting is always the best.
Mm-hmm. So when you're auditioning an actor, are you giving direction as well? Are you acting when you're reading the lines that you're giving?
Yes. I'm there to support the actor, and I'm reading and I'm listening and I'm observing. Mm-hmm. And that's been my process from the very beginning. I'm not always the best actor, the best reader. I mean, there have been times where the actor I'm reading opposite has been so good, I might even forget to act. I might be just mesmerized by that skill and talent. But usually I'm just there to create an environment where the actor can do his or her best work. Making notes, making mental notes. And rarely have I had someone audition well and perform poorly. And I think other people say, "Oh, she doesn't audition well." If she doesn't audition well, she's not going to act well. There's rarely I've had people audition poorly, and someone would override me and say, "Oh, the director, the famous quote, I can get it out of her." And the second, third day, I get a call saying, "Please replace her." And it's one of the most painful parts of the job of casting, because what you're doing, you have to go notify that actress and her agent that we're going to recast. And no matter how you phrase it, it does affect the actor's confidence. So to just protect myself from having to do that, I've always made sure I get it right the first time.
So let's go back to the 1980s for a minute, because that's when you started to produce. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of those projects, starting with Amen, which you cast and co-produced.
Correct.
How did that come about?
So it's really, I went to Russia mm-hmm. when I was to prepare myself for the casting of America with a K. And while there, standing at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Leningrad, in which there was a guy. When you hear someone speaking English, if you're an American in a country where everybody's speaking Russian, your ears perk up. And so a guy came over and says, "Oh, you're American?" I said, "Yes." And we talked, and he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Los Angeles." He said, "Oh, I used to live in L.A., or I had a friend there that lived in L.A. Named Ed Weinberger." And I said, "Oh, Ed Weinberger." I said, "He created the Cosby Show. He's doing very well." I said, "Oh, I haven't seen him in a long time." And so I said, "Well, if I see him, when I get back to L.A., I'll tell him he said hello." So I returned to Los Angeles, and there's a message on my voicemail on my phone list to call Ed Weinberger. I assumed that this guy called Ed Weinberger to say I met someone named Reuben Cannon, blah, blah. So when I met with Ed, he says, "No, I haven't talked to this guy in years. Last time I heard, he had joined the Communist Party." So he says, "No, I called you because I just thought I admired your work, and I'm going to do a TV pilot called Amen. I'd love you to join me as a producer." And I had made the decision to scale back on my casting, to focus more on producing. My business card has said for years, Reuben Cannon Associates, casting and production. I had become so successful in casting, I had not fulfilled the producing part. And and I never worked on a half-hour sitcom. This was going to be, once again, a new opportunity. I worked in dramas, had never worked on a sitcom. And working with Ed Weinberger, who was a master, had worked on, not only created the Cosby Show, but on Taxi, all those wonderful shows. So I immediately signed on. And if you watch the show, there's a reason why the character is named Reverend Reuben. And and Sherman Hemsley was attached, but no one else was attached. So once again, that was a wonderful cast, a way to surround him with a fresh group of actors, or at least actors that would complement him. And very often when you're happenstance, it's such a big part of our business, which I love, that if you're in a space where you're looking for something and if you're focused, we had auditioned a lot of actors to play the young reverend who takes over the church. And I was reading Jet magazine, and I read a story that Clifton Davis had started a church in Michigan, had joined a special congregation. And I believe that once an actor, always an actor. So I reached out and called him. I said, look, I know there's a wonderful role here. I know you just started a church. Maybe you could take some time off to, and I said, it's about a reverend named Reverend Reuben working with Deacon Fry, played by, and he came out, he auditioned, he was fantastic, and we said, you always think, well, God, this guy, what have I done? He got his calling from the Lord. I'm giving him a call from Hollywood. He chose Hollywood, and they were great. He and Sherman were great together, and then became part of Thelma. We went to New York to audition actors, and Anne-Marie Horsford came in. Had a one that should have been doing a lot of good theater, and once again, and just nailed the part. But there was also a role in that series of Jester Hairston. Jester Hairston was 90 years old when we cast him, and he stayed with the series the entire time. I mean, he was absolutely loved and adored, and so many other wonderful actors and actresses in there. In fact, one actress I just saw in Atlanta who thanked me for casting her in the series. Mm-hmm.
So as a producer, what were some of the duties that you were taking on?
And with duties, but most of all, wonderful opportunity. Ed Weinberger, what makes him such a special producer, he's open to new ideas. So he says, I would like to provide opportunities for experienced directors as well as inexperienced, and writers. Mm. So reaching out, so once again here as a producer, bringing in writers from different levels, black writers, different levels to work on a show. And we even had writers in residence who weren't even a member of the WGA yet, but who joined, who were being paid simply to observe and learn. They were truly being paid a WGA salary, not the same as the writers, to observe and learn. And because it is, when you're in the room with a group of writers doing rewrites at 2 and 3 in the morning with a skilled team of writers, and David Lloyd and Ed Weinberger, as well as other fresh writers. We had Daryl Quarles, who is to write constantly and would submit, and then one day he's finally got it and ended up becoming a staff writer. And directors, being able to, Bill Duke, who had earned a wonderful reputation for directing drama, giving Bill a chance to direct comedy. So it was just a learning experience for me, but also a chance to see directors and writers just grow and expand the employment opportunities especially for the underserved and the underutilized black talent.
Did you spend much time on set?
Yeah, I mean, my office was at Paramount. My office had an office there at Paramount. It was a Johnny Carson production, so my main office was at Carson Production, and I wasn't doing any other casting at the time. I had some satellite offices, but my main focus was on simply producing A Man and developing other projects to produce.
Did you stay with the program for the run of the show?
I did, and ultimately worked with N. Weinberger again on another show called Good News.
Good News, yeah. Which was also about a pastor?
Yeah, about a pastor, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like he reinvented himself. He borrowed from himself.
You also cast and produced The Women of Brewster Place, which is another miniseries.
Miniseries, a wonderful miniseries. After The Color Purple, it was the first project, so Oprah and I became very good friends and on The Color Purple, and we talked about Brewster Place. She knew the book, loved the book, and I'm not quite sure if the original idea came from Jerry Eisenberg, Carol Eisenberg, but the rights to the book were available somehow, and or it might have been someone else, might have been one of the producers. But I was asked to come on board as a producing partner on that series, which would, and I recommended a writer who was a staff writer on Moonlighting. So I recommended the writer and also had a voice and a director, Donna Deesh, who directed. But most of all, assembling the cast. And there, Eileen Knight, my former casting associate, who was now an independent casting director, I called back to do the casting for me. And she did a fantastic job. I mean, when you talk about chemistry, the chemistry among those cast members, you know, in every scene. It was just wonderful. In fact, I have a poster in my home of Jack A. and Lynn Whitfield and Oprah together. And once again, so those of us who have the opportunity, who are in the position to expand the awareness of African American talent, you know, I think, you know, if we stay in an attitude of gratitude and use our positions to just hire people that does not because it's friends, but because they deserve it. One of the unique things that I've always felt, one of the areas that has not been utilized was using entertainment to expose America to black artists, you know. And so when we, on Brewster Place, I hired a very talented legendary African-American artist named Artist Lane to do portraits of the cast. And if you listen, so when you see the main titles, the main titles there's portraits drawn by Artist Lane of Oprah and of Jack A. and of Paula Kelly and just Robin Gibbons portraits, you know, and which float across the screen underneath a score by David Shire. And so it was just really, but once again, so America got a chance to, you know, to see the work of a noted artist that they may not have seen because, you know, had they not watched the program. To tell the story about, and when the series, when the once again, talk about network concepts and perceptions, it was a 4-hour miniseries. The president of the network, once again, said, "Oh, I don't know what to make of this. It's not Roots. It's not this. It's not going to do well." Well, it went on to, and Cap Cities at the time owned ABC. So the show went on to set records for miniseries and whatever that time slot. And Oprah and the president of the studio of the network, the president of the network, had made that quote to Oprah that he didn't think it was very special. He didn't think it was, you know, he didn't know what it was, which showed how disconnected he was, because it was a very clear portrait of American life and women empowering themselves to take over their neighborhood, you know, to reclaim their neighborhood. So she was personally, I think she might have been personally offended, but really just realized this, you know, so she passed it on to Bob Wright, and the show became, you know, a major success in 2 nights it aired. And I'm not sure that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but next thing you know, that president was not there anymore. Mm-hmm. Then it was picked up to series. And that was a great, because we shot the pilot, we shot the 4-hour miniseries. We filmed on the back lot of Universal Studios, my old home. And but when it went to series, it was agreed we would shoot it in Chicago, my real home. And so to come home to do a TV series, was just, was one of the great highlights. And I actually was able to hire my mother once to come down to the set to do, this is a funny story. I was so busy working, because when you're producing, I was the on-set producer on location there in Chicago, in correspondence with Phoenix Entertainment, Jerry Eisenberg and people, but I was there relocated. My family didn't relocate because my kids were in school, but I was there Monday through Friday, and I would come home on weekends. You know. And working around the clock, looking at night, I would, be looking at edited first cuts, and so there was an opportunity to have my mother come down to work as an extra. So I said, "Mom, I want you to come down. I want to see you. So come down. I'm going to put you on the scene next to Oprah. Oprah ran a cafe, and you'll be in the background, but you'll be prominently, featured in a scene. You'll get to see yourself in a TV series. So she comes down. I send a car for her to bring her to set. We put her through wardrobe and makeup, and she's sitting there as a background, as a patron of this restaurant, in every scene that Oprah's in. So at lunchtime, she says to me, "Junior, I'm tired. I want to go home." I said, "Mom, you can't just know I'm tired. I want to go home." She said, "This is a mess. I'm missing my stories for this." So I do a bit of argument with my mother. She's like, "I'll take the bus. I don't need to." I said, "No." So I said, "Well, just give me a chance to find someone to put the same wardrobe on." So I had to find another extra to put a wig on and put a dress on, and we got away with it, but she went home. So most people would give their life to be on a scene in a movie, let alone Oprah. My mother says, "Look, I'm not. This is a mess," and she never ever expressed any interest in coming visit me on any set to do anything. She was totally disenchanted with movie making, but it was a joy, and part of the joy is that also that series served as I'll say, for lack of a better word, a dumping ground for so many of my childhood experiences. I had a little doo-wop group growing up. So if you look at the opening titles of Brewster Place, Take 6, I flew Take 6 in to do a cappella doo-wop in front of a brick wall, singing the title song, the title theme, and just so much. And also the staffing. As a producer, here we were filming in Chicago in a black-owned studio with a black producer, black writers, and once again, no one was hiring us, even the DP. The DP was Joe Wilcox, who had filmed Roots, and really hadn't worked since then. He was under contract to Michael Jackson. Michael kept him on salary year-round to film him or to film the animals, and he was just there, and I called and say, "Joe, you want to really do some real work?" And he was able to get released from his contract with Michael to come back and do the TV series. So we had a wonderful staff, but one of the things I mandated for every department head is that they hire a black trainee. If you're head of wardrobe, would you mind? So the only way we're going to increase the talent pool is provide opportunities for other people who aspire and who have some experience. So every department head, it was mandated, and some didn't want to do it, and we just found those who were willing to work with us to hire, an African American to work in their department. Years later, when I went back to produce Meet the Browns, many of those people who got their break on Brewster Place were there for makeup, wardrobe, hair. So, when given opportunities and people who are committed, they will grow. And so I'm proud of the series, even though the series didn't work, the program worked.
That's great. And that was your first time producing with Oprah?
First time producing with Oprah.
And how was that partnership on the production side?
It was great. I mean, she had a day job. We were filming there at Harpo. So in the morning she would do her show, and then in the afternoon she'd come over and do Brewster Place. So she was Oprah Winfrey in the morning and Maddie Michaels in the afternoon. And there was because I was on location, I received per diem, and my per diem was $700 a week. And I received it every Friday, and I was just so happy to be working this was just a dream. I mean, doing the stories we told were stories about a neighborhood, a community, which was in spirit was like the community I grew up in. And so one Friday I was feeling so good, I decided to take a walk, in that area at the time before it was undeveloped where Harpo was. Harpo was like an oasis in an area that's still emerging. It's now totally been gentrified, but it was at the time still borderline slum, a lot of homeless. So I was taking a walk around just to get some air, and I saw a guy, like all I could see was his feet hanging out of the dumpster. And I went over to him and I said, "Sir, I'd like to give you something." So I gave him $100 was my per diem, right? And he looked at me and I said, "Please go get yourself some food." So 2 weeks later, I'm taking the walk again, and I see him. He sees me, and he says, and he's with a bunch of friends, "There he is!" And I was chased all the way back to the studio. Like I said, "There's that idiot who gave me $100. There's the man." I think he was grateful, but every day they was waiting for me to come by there, And so I had to take a different path whenever I needed to go out to get some air. But it was a very rewarding experience, a joy. Oprah was fantastic, and but it was provided a lot of opportunities for writers. And Maya Angelou wrote a script for the episode. Mm-hmm. And we had to make some changes. And the question was like, who's going to call and tell Maya you're going to rewrite her script? I said, I'll call her. And she's such a pro. She says, Reuben, I wrote what I wrote. It's your show. Do what you need to do to make it work. And and that's And I want to go. I think we might have skipped over the fact when I first met Maya. I think I cast a TV miniseries called Sister Sister, and this was I don't know quite on the year, but it was Fox had put either Fox or NBC had made a production deal with Maya, Dr. Maya Angelou, and she wrote a script called Sister Sister. It was a 4-hour miniseries about. It starred Diane Carroll and a group of other talented actresses. Gloria Foster, I think, might have been in it, but it was a wonderful ensemble. Well, because I knew who she was and I know Why the Caged Bird Sings and some of her other books, I was truly, intimidated, even though I'd seen Brando and I'd seen, I was about to meet this like royalty. So I remember that day picking out, fussing over what I'm going to wear, because I wanted so much for her to approve and to like me. And I chose my suit very carefully. I rehearsed saying her name, Angela Lowe, not Angelou. I rehearsed it. And finally went to meet with her because I had the job, but I was finally going to meet with her at Fox to talk to her what was her vision and concept of these characters. And did she have any ideas of casting? So I walked in and I introduced myself. I said, Dr. Angelo, I'm Reuben Cannon. And she says, hello, Mr. Cannon. Now, when Maya Angelou says Mr. Cannon, she's your name, it resonates like you've been knighted. But what I said to her later on as we became brother, sister, I said, I told you who I was, and you told me who I could be. And I would say from that point on in my career, I built my career around living up to what she called me, Mr. Cannon. In my career, there was 2 objectives. One was to restore honor and dignity to my name, Reuben Cannon, make my mother proud, and also live up to what Maya Angelou said when she first met me. Hello, Mr. Cannon. And the space where she spoke, from which she spoke. As one of my dearest friends, her loss recently was very painful to me, and it's just and very rarely does anything go by where I don't think of her. But that was so. From that moment, we became brother sister, and most people don't remember the miniseries, but it was one of the most important moments of my casting assignments of my career.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned a couple times the film Get on the Bus. Talk about that project.
Yeah, well, Get on the Bus was, most of the time when I would cast for a producer, we would have conversations. I would have conversations with the producer and director from a perspective as a producer versus casting director. I didn't let the title casting director get in the way of my probing, discussing collaborations or ideas. I was there to do my job, and I always did my job well as a casting director. But beyond that, what else can I learn? How else can we be in business? So Bill Borden, had hired me to cast a movie titled Desperado for Robert Rodriguez. So during that time, we became friends and discussed possibly working together as producing partners, on a picture. So I finished casting Desperado, which was a wonderful experience working with, it was Robert Rodriguez's first film, and introducing him to Selma Hayek and Danny Trejo. And well, I'll tell you quickly about that story. It goes back to when I tell you I hired the first Hispanic casting. I trained the first Hispanic casting director, Robert Morones. Mm-hmm. So Bob Morones was my assistant, and that I brought into the Universal Casting Department, and he went on to have a career as an independent casting director. So when I was hired to cast Desperado, which probably should have gone to a Hispanic casting director, but my brand or my name and reputation. So, and Bill Borden said to Robert Rodriguez, "You should hire Reuben Cannon," and he did. So when I met with Robert Rodriguez, he says, "Look, I don't want to use the usual suspects." And Desperado was based on his earlier film called Mariachi. Mariachi was made for like maybe I think made for like $7,000, something like that, and it went on to win awards, and has an interesting story behind it. But he says, I cast local people in Mariachi. I want to use actors, but I want them to be fresh. I don't want, the usual suspects. So I called Bob Morones, and he went off about, Reuben, it's bad enough that you cast all the black movies, you cast the white movies, now you're taking jobs from the Hispanic casting community. Well, have you no shame? So I let him get on about that, and I said, well, okay, but here's your chance to say thank you for me introducing you to, I said, I need you, Rodriguez wants to hire fresh faces. And you could save me a lot of time by telling me in your travels who you've come across. And I think Bob Morones had been doing some, outreach acting classes at a prison here off Long Beach, whatever that prison is. There's a local jail or something. And I said, so not there, but who have you come across? He says, well, there's a guy that recently was released from prison named Danny Trejo, and you should meet with him. So I called Danny Trejo up, and he came in, and he still had that kind of that prison. Usually when actors come in, they want to impress you. They want to talk about, this guy didn't say a word. He just sat there kind of stoically looking at me and looking every now and then over his shoulder like, he was waiting for an attack. But the energy was really dark and down. And, I don't usually have to talk in these auditions. Actors do all the talking. And so I finally said to him, have we met before? And he says, you ever been inside? Meaning the code where you have been in jail. I said, no, then we never met. So I said, well, how did you become an actor? He said, well, I'm not sure I'm an actor, but I'll tell you. I said, well, Bob told me you've done one role already. He said, yeah, here's what happened. He says, when I was in prison, I was part of a organization that provided protection for the vulnerable. We had a protection service that the family members on the outside would make deposits into an account. And, we would provide protection for those on the inside. So when I was released from prison, I just drew down my portion, $13,000 or $15,000, which allowed me to not work. I didn't have to work. Wasn't desperate for a job. He says, but also I joined AA when I was in prison. So once I was released, I would get calls and I would provide support to members of the AA, to alcoholics. And he said, I received a call once from an actor who was doing a movie, and we needed some support. And I went down to the set, and I'm just there, and they were casting the role of a stick-up man. And the director said to the casting director, look, you're bringing me all these surfers. I need a guy that looks like that guy. Give me somebody that looks like him. In fact, why don't we read him for the part? So the casting director came over to me and said, look, I know you're here just, working, supporting your friend, but would you mind reading for a role? And I said, well, no, I'm not an actor. He said, no, but just read for a director that likes your look. It was a role of a stick-up man. It wasn't a few lines, so he took the script, went over and read for the director, and he read them well. I said, that's amazing. Where'd you learn that? He says, my father. So your father was a stick-up man? No, he says, your father was an actor? He said, no, my father was a stick-up man. When I was a little boy, he would stand me in front of the mirror and rehearse me saying, this is a stick-up. So we hired Danny Trejo, and Danny went on from that. Now, this is the story that Danny tells me, right? So I'm telling a story that he went on, so he did Desperado. He's the guy with the knives, and has gone on to have a major career. In fact, I was casting another movie for Walter Hill called Undisputed, It was Undisputed. It was a movie starring Ving Rhames and Wesley Snipes, and it took place in a prison. And I had Danny come in and audition, and I wanted to hire him. I couldn't afford him. His agent said, "Reuben, he lives in Hancock Park now. He gets a lot of money. He's not going to work for that." So I was just happy and proud that he had a career.
Right.
But so Bill Borden called me and said, "Reuben, I have an idea for a movie." He said his partner Barry Rosenberg called me with the idea, and I said, "Let's call Reuben." Barry had been up. I guess he was an insomniac, and he was watching the news, and the news coverage was about the Million Man March, and he saw a group of black men who had boarded a bus here in L.A. to take the ride to Washington, D.C. And he thought, wouldn't that be interesting if we did a movie about that? But he was thinking more of a documentary. And he called me and says, and we can have Reuben direct it. So he called me. I said, I'm not interested in directing, but I'd like to produce it, and I think Spike would be very good to direct this. I said, and it simply was a concept. So I called Spike, and he grumbled about, what are they doing on the bus? Are they singing or what are they doing? I said, no, it's a great chance. What I like about this, it's an opportunity to look at a diverse group of black men. The portraits and the portrayals of black men are much too narrow. This shows we get a chance to cast a diverse spectrum of black men. So he called back and he says, I like it. If you can raise the money, we should do it as an independent. And let's raise the money together. Let's make it for $2 million. I'll take the athletes. You take the actors out there in Hollywood, and we'll make it as an independent movie. I said, deal. And that was really still the beginning. At the end, there are no athletes except for one. All the other investors are friends of mine and people I knew. I mean, there's one athlete, and that's Charles. I can't think. Played for the New York Knicks, and then he went on later to play for Seattle. But the rest of the investors are friends of mine, Larkin Arnold and Olden Grisby, Gerald Busby, Johnny Cochran was an investor. And the production was called 15 Black Men. But I also made Spike write the first check for $100,000. I wrote the second. So the first $200,000 came from Spike, and I said, well, I'm going to go out and raise money. I wanted to be able to say that we have some skin in the game. And that was pretty much my operational method up to I started producing for Tyler, that if I was raising money for an independent film, I would write the first check. And so there was no question, if I believe in it, I believe it's going to be profitable, then I should also be an investor. So I love to get on the bus, the process, and every aspect. Once again, when you're working as an independent, you may not even know what you don't know. But we knew the concept was that what if we were able, the Million Man March took place in October, and we felt, what if we could have the movie completed in time for a release on the first anniversary? It's pretty ambitious to go from concept to script to completion and release. But we didn't know what we didn't know. So we hired a talented writer who was a staff writer on a TV series named Reggie Bythewood. And Reggie had attended the march. And Reggie was assigned to a TV series, but he said he was going to have a Christmas break. And during the Christmas break, he would board a bus here in LA and ride the journey from here to Washington, D.C. And when he got off the plane, when he finished the ride, he'd have a script, which meant we'd have a script the first of the year. And he did. He turned in the first draft like the first week of January. I think he might have started working on some concepts prior to that, but we had a script. And my job, meanwhile, was to dial for dollars. So I raised $2.5 million from a group of private investors. And we made the movie for $2.5 million. And during our second week, and the plan was to make it for $2.5 million and to sell it for $5 million. Thinking that, and that would be, double the return, double the budget. During the second week of production, we received an offer from Columbia for $3.5 million. And we accepted it because here was a chance to be in profit before the film was even completed. and to return and invest to the investors that money. Could we have held out and put it in a block? You know, here was a wonderful statement, because the reason black films were still made at the beck and call of the studio, but here was a group that showed unity. We had united to come together to make a movie about a very important event. So accepted the offer, returned everyone their money, interest and profit before the film was made. The first time in history in Hollywood where a film was made and the investors received their money prior to the release of the movie. And because we just sold it outright, there was no future revenue. And that was the first movie I actually produced from concept to release. And I'm very proud of it because it did what I hoped it would do in the way of broadening the exposure of black men. You have and the father-son relationship in that movie is very important. And because of the death of my father and whatever issues I may have, as a father, and in terms of what never took place because my father died when I was so young, the father-son issues, if I can address them in film, are always important to me. At least they resonate with me in a very special way. Mm-hmm. And as well as the issue of the diverse political beliefs, and there's a Republican on the bus who is anti-everything and black, and how he relates and how the other members relate to him. And Ossie Davis, working with Ossie Davis in the movie, who's just, any chance to work with Ossie, no matter what you're doing, is truly a blessing. And Rock Dutton, and Spike. Spike is a very talented director. And we shot the movie in 18 days in 3 different states. I mean, that was the level of the spirit and cooperation that it inspires you and empowers you when you do something that most people say you can't do. So that's why I'm so happy and proud of that movie.
Yeah. And that financial model is something you continued to do?
I did. I used the same model, and it's total transparency, where we always pay the investors back first in this case. And usually the model had been to make the movie, sell it to the first buyer as a profit, no matter what the offer came in. There's no future revenue, but it guarantees a return to the investor. So we did the second movie I did was with that model was Dancing in September, mm-hmm. Which Reggie Bythewood, the same writer who wrote Get on the Bus. And I'll tell you about Dancing in September. Dancing in September, this is what's a great thing about the industry, that you can learn as you go. It's on-the-job training, even for those of us who've been in the business a while. And on Dancing in September, I didn't want to do it. I wasn't going to do it, but the script was so well written. And I liked Reggie, and I had such confidence in him, I agreed to do it, which meant to take on the script and raise the money for it. And the budget was about $1.5 million. And Reggie was the original, put up his first. Reggie was also an investor in Get on the Bus. And Reggie had put up, he was a newlywed, and he put up a big portion of his savings initially for this movie. So not only am I taking on the burden of his money, but also I'm going to now go out and raise money from a group of investors. And we started filming. The budget's $1 million, maybe a little bit over about $1.2 million. And when I agreed to start production with only $600,000 in the bank.
We got to stop there to change the tape.
Okay.